All right, so this is the second part of our series on evolution. Some notes to supplement what we've been doing in class. We've taken notes on the history of evolution and the people involved in it and the ideas of natural selection that Darwin proposed. But now we need to kind of return back to this idea of the nature of science, observations and inferences, theories and laws. And I want to hark back onto the idea of observations and this idea right here of data. So in order to have our theories, we need to have data on which we base those ideas. And so what we need to do now is look at the evidence for evolution. And that's what we're going to do very quickly. Here are 5 major categories of the evidence for evolution: embryology, homologous structures, vestigial structures, fossils, and DNA. And we're going to go through these one by one, talk about what they are, and talk about a couple examples so you understand them. So comparative embryology is the science of dealing with the comparison of different organisms pre-birth or pre-hatching development, or the study of the embryo. So as you notice here, on the left we've got a drawing of an embryo of I hope you can guess, a turtle versus a human. And you can see that they are different, but there are some major similarities. And what we see is that vertebrates, especially vertebrates, have very stark similarities, have key similarities early in their development, early in right immediately after conception, and as they continue, they start to separate in different directions, but still they're relatively similar. This is an interesting idea. So how might this serve as evidence that supports the theory of evolution? Well, it makes the inference that we have a common ancestor. Our development is coded for by sometimes the environment and sometimes the genetics. And by developing in the same way, it implies that we have similar genetic material, implying that we have a fairly recent common ancestor. And that's the key here. We have a fairly common recent ancestor. Homologous structures is the next piece of evidence, and these are structures that are similar across different species due to common ancestry. So, here's a diagram, a cartoon of humans, horse, cat, bat, bird, and whale appendages. And if you notice the color coding indicates the same bones, but if you notice they've taken on very different shapes. The human has 5 fingers here, whereas in the horse it's been modified into this part of the leg. In cats, they've got their finger-like parts. The bat has these appendages that provide the wing its structure. Birds have been modified even more, and the whale has been modified again. So you can see actually that there are quite a few modifications, but they're actually the same bones, and that provides evidence that there's a common ancestor involved as well. Vestigial structures are or special kind of homologous structures that have lost most of their function. Vestige means a remnant of, or it reminds us of something that we no longer need. So a tailbone in humans would be considered a vestigial structure. These external gills on the salamander, adult salamander, are vestigial. It was necessary, it was important when the salamander was underwater as an amphibian, but now that it lives on land, these are vestigial, they're no longer needed. Here's a snake skeleton, and if you look down here, we've got 2 leg bones. As you know, snakes don't have legs, but they do have leg bones, which is quite interesting, implying that they at one time, their ancestors, had legs. And then for humans, you should know that there are several very interesting vestigial structures, and one of these is the nictitating membrane. There's a little flap of skin right here in the corner of your eye. You might know it as the pink of your eye. That's a flap of skin that actually can fold, not up and down like your eyelids, but the other way, to close as a membrane to protect us from water. We'll be able to keep our eyes closed in water, but still be able to see through them, reminding us of our ancestry with modern-day reptiles. here's a whale skeleton. It's got a hip bone way out here, whereas we know whales don't have legs, so why would they have hip bones? Well, these are structures that we share with them. They're homologous structures, but they serve no function to the whale now. And so it shows common ancestry with things that do have function for those structures. All right, fossils. So there are two ways that we date fossils. One is relative dating, the other is absolute dating. Relative dating is relative ages of rocks and fossils. So for example, looking at this diagram, we can answer these two questions. Which fossils were alive at the same time? Is it A, B, or C? Well, based on the idea that things that are older are further down into the earth, we see that A and B are at the same level, we infer that A and B were alive at about the same time. And 2 says which fossils are the oldest and how can you tell? Well, C is the oldest, it's furthest down in these layers of fossils. So that's relative dating. It's just one is older than the other. But there's absolute dating as well. Oh, how does this serve as evidence? We can see the record of our of living things through history, and can identify when things went extinct, when things survived, when things lived together, and how they might have interacted. So here's a fossil. Here's another. And this has actually been very well documented in modern horses. We find fossil evidence of all these other species that we infer are ancestors of the modern horse. And then, I don't know, I guess I skipped this. Absolute dating. And this is essentially when scientists can date both rocks and dead organisms using radioisotopes. And radioisotopes are elements that undergo decay at a constant rate. So, just for example, the most common one that you probably heard of is carbon-14. Carbon-14 is unstable, it's radioactive, and it decays down into carbon-12. And they can measure how much carbon-14 is left to estimate, based on its rate of decay, how long ago something died. And so they have an absolute number on that rather than a relative number. And the last piece of evidence is DNA. So how much of the same genes do you think humans share with these species? Well, we share quite a bit, 90-some% with this mouse, a little bit less with this yeast, and a little bit less with the earthworm, and a little bit less with the yeast, but still a lot more than you would think. We share a lot of the same genetic material and the same proteins. So here's an exercise. You should be able to identify which organism is most closely related to humans and which one is least closely related. So what we have here are chimps, gorillas, humans, and orangutans. We've got A's, T's, C's, and G's. You might remember from DNA. We've only got one strand here, but what you're asked to do is figure out which species are most closely related to humans. So what we need to do is identify, here's the humans line, and we need to identify which one of the other three are most closely related to the humans. And I'm not going to answer that for you. If you need to pause it, pause it. And I want you to see if you can figure this out, and which one is least closely related to humans. Not that we're not related, but least closely related. And sharing the same DNA is what serves as another piece of evidence that Darwin did not have, but it supports the theory of evolution because that genetic material gets passed down from generation to generation. So if we share DNA, that implies that we have a common ancestor from which we got our genetic material. And that's the evidence for evolution. And I think that that's we're gonna wrap up there.